A thin green film once shut down an entire municipal water system in less than 48 hours, and investigators later confirmed the bloom was natural, not political. That single finding stunned senior officials because it cut straight through weeks of suspicion, accusation, and quiet panic. Stay with this story to the end, because what unfolds next explains why South Africa's top public servants say they were staggered by how fast a scientific issue became a political storm. If you care about how truth survives pressure, subscribe now and watch closely. Behind closed doors, Senior Directors General compared the algal bloom crisis to a sudden power outage in government trust. They insist there was no political interference, yet the public mood suggested otherwise. This is where the tension lives, science moving slowly, politics moving fast. Before we go further, make sure you're subscribed, because the final moments of this video reveal why this case may quietly reshape how environmental crises are handled in South Africa. What you're about to hear isn't just about algae and water. It's about credibility, authority, and the fragile line between evidence and influence. As you watch to the end, you'll see why officials say they were genuinely unprepared for the intensity of the backlash, and why their response now matters far beyond this single incident. Subscribe, stay with it, and judge the facts for yourself. The first alarm didn't come from politicians at all. It came from technicians who noticed abnormal chlorophyll readings, rising faster than seasonal models predicted. Within hours, laboratory phones were ringing, and by the next morning, the data confirmed a harmful algal bloom. In real time, the science was clear, but outside the labs, the narrative was already drifting. Two realities emerged at once. The bloom was real and suspicion was instant. As water advisories spread, so did claims of deliberate neglect or manipulation. Senior public servants describe watching social media transform technical bulletins into political weapons. One internal memo later described the atmosphere as emotionally charged but evidentially thin. Facts existed, but belief moved faster. That gap became the real battleground. At the center of the storm were South Africa's most senior administrators, people trained to stay neutral under pressure. Several have since admitted they were caught off guard by how quickly the crisis was framed as interference, rather than incident. In meetings, scientists spoke of nutrients, temperature, and runoff, while outside, commentators spoke of power and motive. The contrast was jarring. Independent laboratories were then pulled in to double-check results. Their findings matched the original data almost perfectly. No chemical signatures of sabotage, no political fingerprints. Just biology responding to environmental conditions. Yet instead of calming the debate, confirmation seemed to harden skepticism. For many observers, proof itself had become suspect. One official later used a striking metaphor, saying the bloom became a mirror, not a microscope. People weren't looking closely at the science. They were seeing reflections of their distrust in institutions. That insight explains why the phrase, "ruled out political interference," landed with such force. It challenged not just a claim, but a mood. The word "staggered" began circulating after a closed briefing with parliamentary committees. Senior public servants described feeling stunned by how deeply political assumptions had embedded themselves into a scientific matter. Some had expected tough questions. Few expected outright disbelief. The experience exposed a fault line between expertise and public confidence. Media pressure intensified when leaked emails suggested internal disagreements. On closer inspection, those messages showed routine scientific debate, not political meddling. Experts argued over sampling locations and testing frequency, exactly as protocol demands. Still, the damage was done. Nuance rarely survives a headline. As weeks passed, attention shifted from the bloom itself to the integrity of the response. Why weren't communities warned earlier? Why did communication feel fragmented? Officials answered by pointing to overlapping jurisdictions and legacy systems never designed for instant transparency. The bloom was natural. The confusion was systemic. By the time senior public servants went on record to rule out interference, they weren't just defending findings, they were defending process. They emphasized chain-of-custody protocols, independent verification, and documented timelines. Each detail mattered because credibility was now the real currency. public reaction remained mixed. Some accepted the explanation and moved on. Others saw denial where officials saw closure. This split revealed something deeper. Environmental crises now unfold in a climate of permanent suspicion. Science must not only be accurate, it must also be narratively resilient. Internally, departments began reviewing how scientific information is released during emergencies. Several officials admitted that silence, even when unintentional, creates space for speculation. The algal bloom became a case study in how quickly absence of clarity invites political framing, even without political action. International observers quietly took note. Harmful algal blooms are increasing worldwide, driven by climate variability and pollution. South Africa's experience showed how environmental events can trigger governance crises without a single corrupt act. That realization unsettled many senior administrators. One veteran civil servant remarked that the most dangerous bloom wasn't in the water, but in the discourse. When evidence is doubted by default, decision-making slows and trust erodes. That sentiment captured why officials reacted so strongly. They weren't just defending this case. They were defending the idea that facts still matter. As the story matured, attention turned to prevention. Nutrient runoff, aging wastewater infrastructure, and rising temperatures formed a quiet background chorus. None of these were political interventions, yet all were politically inconvenient. Addressing them requires long timelines and uncomfortable budgets. The algal bloom also exposed how fragmented authority can blur accountability. National departments, provincial agencies, and local municipalities each held pieces of responsibility. In that fragmentation, it became easy for suspicion to find a home. No single villain, no single voice. By now, senior public servants say the experience has changed how they view public engagement. Technical certainty alone is no longer enough. Communication must anticipate mistrust, not react to it. The bloom forced that lesson into sharp relief. Two final observations shaped the closing briefings. First, independent science remains the strongest defense against interference claims. Second, independence must be visible, not assumed. Without that visibility, even the cleanest process can look compromised. As the issue faded from headlines, it left behind a quieter question. If a natural algal bloom can ignite this level of political suspicion, what happens during a truly contested crisis? That question lingers, unanswered long after the water clears. In the end, the officials' ruling wasn't a triumphant declaration. It was a sober statement, delivered with measured language and supporting data. They ruled out political interference, but they did not rule out lessons. The stagger wasn't about algae. It was about realizing how fragile trust has become.